They say the ones who run from love aren't running from you. They're running from the mirror you hold up to their soul. The moment the avoidant loses the one who truly saw them, something inside them shatters quietly, because it's not just love they lose. It's the chance to ever feel safe in love again. The realization of irreversibility is one of the most powerful emotional awakenings an avoidant person can experience. For most of their emotional journey, they live under the illusion of control, believing that love is something they can manage on their own terms. They are used to creating distance whenever connection feels too intense, too vulnerable, or too unpredictable. To them, pulling away feels safe. It feels like reclaiming their power. They convince themselves that detachment is not loss, but protection, that emotional withdrawal is a sign of strength rather than fear. They think that even if they step back now, the door will always remain open. The other person will still be there, waiting, understanding, hoping. But the truth reveals itself slowly, and when it does, it shatters the illusion they've built to survive. The moment they sense the shift in your energy, something in them falters. It's not loud, not immediate, but subtle. A quiet realization that the warmth they once took for granted has disappeared. The way you used to respond with softness is replaced by calm indifference. The emotional presence they used to feel, even in silence, now feels like an empty space. That's when they start to realize something has changed, but they can't quite name it yet. They tell themselves, "You're just upset," that you'll come back when you've cooled off. They may even believe that your distance is a reaction to theirs, something temporary and repairable. But beneath that denial, a quiet fear begins to grow. The fear that this time, the distance might not end. Avoidants live in a psychological paradox. They crave closeness but fear it at the same time. They want to be loved deeply but resist being truly seen. For them, the safest form of love is one they can keep at arm's length. They think that by controlling how much they give and how much they take, they can avoid the chaos of emotional dependence. But when they lose someone who truly cared, someone who offered understanding without judgment, that balance collapses. They realize they were never in control at all. The emotional detachment they thought protected them becomes the very reason for their heartbreak. It's in this moment they understand the permanence of what they've lost, not just a person, but a space where they were accepted despite their fear. What makes this realization so painful is that it comes with clarity. They begin to see how their actions looked from the outside. They start to understand how many chances they were given, how much love was offered, and how many times they pushed it away. They remember every text they didn't answer, every feeling they minimized, every wall they built to keep you from getting too close. The distance that once gave them peace now becomes unbearable. Not because you're gone, but because they know it's their doing. They recognize that the moment you stopped chasing, stopped explaining, stopped trying to make them open up, was the moment you reclaimed your power, and they lost theirs. It's in this silent recognition that they feel the true weight of irreversibility. There is no grand argument, no final scene of closure, just the quiet knowing that the one person who saw through their walls has finally stopped waiting outside them. The realization doesn't come as anger or panic. It comes as a slow ache, a deep awareness that time won't rewind, that apologies may no longer bridge the distance, that your heart no longer beats in rhythm with theirs. For someone who built their world on emotional distance, this is the cruelest irony. They finally understand the value of closeness only when it's no longer available. When the avoidant finally grasps that they've lost you, something begins to unravel within them. For so long, they have relied on emotional distance as their shield, believing that detachment would protect them from pain. It becomes their coping mechanism, their unspoken rule of survival. They tell themselves that feelings are dangerous, that attachment leads to loss, and that control is safety. But when they realize that you are no longer there, that your presence, your energy, your care have all withdrawn, the very foundation of that control collapses. Emotional disorientation sets in, not as a single moment of panic, but as a slow and persistent confusion that starts to consume them from within. At first, they don't even recognize what they are feeling. Avoidants are not used to the language of longing. They are fluent in avoidance, silence, and logic, not in yearning. They may distract themselves, bury their emotions in work, hobbies, or fleeting connections, trying to prove to themselves that they're unaffected. But beneath the surface, the mind begins to loop. They replay memories they once dismissed, reanalyzing moments they ignored, trying to find the turning point where things began to fade. Their once quiet mind becomes noisy, filled with questions they can't answer. They remember how you looked at them when you still believed in them, how you reached out when they pulled away, and how eventually your eyes stopped searching for theirs. Each memory becomes heavier, not because of what happened, but because they now understand what it meant. The emotional disorientation they feel comes from facing a contradiction they can't escape. They built a life on the belief that they didn't need anyone, yet losing you feels like losing a part of themselves they never acknowledged. They used to believe they were the ones who decided when to connect and when to retreat. But now, for the first time, they realize that someone else had the power to end the cycle, not through confrontation, but through detachment. The same silence they once used as a weapon is now turned against them, and they are forced to sit with the emptiness they created. They sense the irony in their situation but can't find a way to reverse it. The space that once felt peaceful now feels haunting, filled with echoes of what used to be. As the disorientation deepens, their mind becomes a battlefield between denial and truth. One part of them insists they're fine, that they'll move on as they always have. Another part, the quieter and more honest one, whispers that this time is different. They notice the absence of your messages, your laughter, your curiosity about their world. They start to reach for their phone not to text you, but out of habit, then stop when they realize there's nothing to say. This small, mundane realization cuts deeper than any confrontation ever could. It's not that they can't reach you, it's that they don't know how anymore. The emotional language that once felt threatening now feels unreachable, and they begin to feel the consequences of the very distance they relied on. In that state of confusion, their emotional world begins to turn against them. The numbness that once gave them comfort now feels suffocating. The solitude they cherished becomes unbearable. Their thoughts turn restless, their sleep uneasy, and even their moments of distraction start to lose their effect. The loss starts to settle, not as anger, but as emptiness, a hollow awareness that something vital has gone missing. They realize they were never as detached as they pretended to be. They cared deeply. They just never knew how to show it. The disorientation becomes their mirror, forcing them to confront emotions they've spent their entire lives avoiding. They finally see the truth of their pattern, that by trying to protect themselves from pain, they ended up creating the very pain they feared most. The collapse of the illusion of safety marks the moment when the avoidant finally realizes that the very walls they built for protection have turned into their prison. For most of their lives, emotional distance feels like control. They believe that by keeping their feelings contained, by never depending too much on anyone, they can avoid the vulnerability that once wounded them. This detachment becomes their sanctuary, a place where they don't have to risk rejection or disappointment. But when they lose someone who truly cared, that sanctuary turns into isolation. The silence that once felt peaceful becomes heavy. The solitude that once brought comfort begins to sting. It's no longer a choice to be alone. It's the consequence of every choice they made to stay safe. At first, they don't recognize what's happening. They tell themselves they're fine, that this is just another phase of solitude, that they've been alone before and survived it. But deep down, something feels different. There's an unfamiliar ache, a subtle panic beneath their calm exterior. It's the awareness that they no longer have anyone waiting behind the walls. They used to believe that distance gave them power, the power to decide when to come close and when to retreat. But now, the power has shifted. They realize that distance doesn't just keep pain out, it also keeps love out. They begin to see that their safety came at a cost, that every moment of avoidance was a step further from connection, and now, the bridge is gone. This collapse doesn't happen in an instant. It's gradual, creeping into their daily thoughts like a quiet shadow. They wake up and notice the absence of your messages, the lack of warmth in their days, the hollow spaces where your energy used to fill the silence. Their routines feel empty, not because they've changed, but because the meaning behind them has. They used to believe that needing someone was weakness, but now they start to understand that connection was never a threat. It was a lifeline. The emotional armor they once wore with pride begins to feel suffocating, too heavy to carry, too empty to keep them safe. What makes this realization so painful is that it confronts them with the truth about themselves. They see how their idea of safety was built on fear of intimacy, fear of losing control, fear of being hurt the way they once were. Every wall they built was not strength, but a response to pain they never healed. They understand now that they didn't just push others away, they also pushed away the parts of themselves that wanted to love, to be held, to trust. The false safety they created was never protection. It was avoidance dressed as stability. And when that illusion falls, they are left face to face with their own loneliness. They start to look back at moments that now carry new meaning. The times you reached out and they stayed silent. The times you offered love and they dismissed it as pressure. The moments they thought they were escaping conflict when in reality they were escaping connection. Those memories returned like echoes, reminding them of everything they thought they were saving themselves from and everything they lost because of it. The collapse of safety is not just emotional, it's existential. It shakes the very foundation of how they see themselves. When they finally sit with the emptiness, they begin to understand that true safety doesn't come from distance. It comes from vulnerability. It's the courage to let someone see you, even when you're afraid. But this realization comes too late. The distance that once made them feel powerful now makes them powerless. The space they thought would protect them has become the place where they face their deepest truth. That love was never the danger, it was the cure. The delayed emotional awakening of the avoidant happens not in the midst of love, but in the silence that follows its loss. For so long, they move through relationships with an emotional restraint that feels rational, almost justified. They tell themselves that keeping their feelings contained keeps them safe, that if they don't rely on anyone too deeply, they can't be hurt. They misinterpret emotional control as emotional strength, and they view vulnerability as a trap. Yet when the person who once offered warmth, patience, and understanding is no longer there, something begins to stir within them, something they have spent years suppressing. The emotions they avoided during the relationship begin to rise, not in small waves, but in an overwhelming tide that takes them by surprise. At first, they don't recognize this flood for what it is. They mistake it for confusion, restlessness, or even frustration. They might feel an unfamiliar hollowness that no distraction seems to fill. They try to bury it in their routines, in the same solitude that once felt peaceful, but now it feels different. What once was comforting isolation now feels like an echo chamber, amplifying every memory they tried to forget. They begin to recall the sound of your laughter, the tone of your voice when you were patient with them, the softness of your concern when they pulled away. These memories, which they once brushed aside as insignificant, now hit them with a depth they can't explain. This awakening is delayed because avoidants are emotionally inverted. They feel deeply but repress their emotions so effectively that they don't experience them in real time. Instead, those feelings accumulate beneath layers of avoidance until the relationship ends, and the absence of connection removes the very pressure that kept their emotions contained. Suddenly, everything they never allowed themselves to feel comes rushing to the surface. Love they never expressed, regret they never admitted, and grief they never anticipated all collide inside them. It's not that they didn't care when they had you. It's that they didn't know how to feel safely while you were still there. Now, in the quiet aftermath, they have no choice but to face everything they avoided. What makes this emotional awakening so tormenting is its timing. The realization comes too late. They begin to understand how much you mattered only when they can no longer reach you. They replay the small gestures they ignored, the chances they wasted, the moments they could have opened up but didn't. Every missed opportunity becomes heavier with awareness. They start to see how you tried to meet them halfway, how you waited for them to show their heart, how you finally walked away when they refused to. This retrospective clarity becomes their punishment, the painful understanding that they had love within reach and let fear drive it away. The emotions that emerge after loss are raw and unfiltered. They may feel anger, not at you but at themselves, for not realizing what they had when they had it. They may feel shame for the ways they hurt you, guilt for their silence, and sorrow for the version of themselves that couldn't love freely. These emotions crash against their defenses, breaking down the very walls they once relied on. They begin to realize that emotional control was never the same as emotional maturity. They were not protecting themselves, they were depriving themselves. And now, faced with the permanence of your absence, they can finally see the truth of what they lost. This delayed awakening often changes them in ways they can't undo. They start to recognize that real strength is not in detachment, but in vulnerability. They see that love is not about control, but surrender, not about maintaining power, but about sharing presence. But this wisdom comes through pain. The awakening is not peaceful, it is a reckoning. They are finally awake, but the world they wake up to is one without you in it. Silent regret is one of the deepest and most haunting experiences an avoidant person can face after losing someone they truly cared for. Unlike others who express pain through words or tears, the avoidant suffers inwardly in a place too private for the world to see. Their regret doesn't erupt, it lingers quietly, stretching over time, showing up in small, unexpected moments when they least expect it. For so long, they believed that detachment was protection, that keeping emotions buried was the way to stay in control. But once they realize that the person who once made them feel safe, seen, and accepted is gone, a different kind of silence begins to consume them. The kind that comes not from peace, but from loss. They do not chase, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how. Reaching out would mean exposing vulnerability, and that has always been their greatest fear. So, they keep it all inside. The world sees them functioning, calm, seemingly unaffected, but inside they are in turmoil. Every quiet night, every memory that surfaces, every reminder of your presence becomes a mirror reflecting what they couldn't face before. They think of the times you tried to love them despite their distance, how you waited for them to open up, how you showed patience when they pushed you away. Now, that patience haunts them. They realize you weren't asking for perfection, just honesty, You weren't demanding their soul, just their presence, and now they finally understand what you were offering, but only in the silence of your absence. Their regret doesn't come as a single moment of clarity. It builds slowly, piece by piece. They start to notice how empty their routines have become, how the comfort of solitude has turned into a heavy loneliness. They find themselves thinking about what could have been if they had stayed instead of withdrawing, if they had spoken instead of shutting down. They remember the look in your eyes during those last conversations, the subtle way your hope faded each time they pulled back. Those images replay in their mind, not as punishment from you, but as an echo of their own choices. The silence that follows the end of something meaningful becomes a constant reminder of the price they paid for emotional safety. What makes silent regret so painful is that it cannot be undone. There is no apology that feels adequate, no gesture that can rewrite the past. Even if they wanted to reach out, they fear rejection. They know too much time has passed and the bond they once relied on has dissolved. So instead, they grieve quietly. They scroll through old messages, replay old songs, revisit old places, not to reconnect, but to feel closer to the ghost of what once was. Their mind becomes a loop of memories, moments they never valued enough when they had them, words they wish they had said, emotions they wish they had expressed. Over time, this regret begins to change them. It doesn't happen overnight, but something within them starts to shift. They begin to see that emotional avoidance is not protection, but self-inflicted pain. They realize that the love they feared was never meant to trap them. It was meant to free them from the walls they built. The person they lost becomes a mirror of who they could have been if they had allowed themselves to love fully. In silence, they begin to understand that their greatest mistake was not losing you. It was never letting themselves be fully known by you. This transformation is slow but profound. They may never speak of it, may never admit it aloud, but inside, the lesson remains carved into them. The silent regret becomes their teacher. It forces them to confront the truth that love cannot be controlled, that vulnerability is not weakness, and that the heart they tried to protect was never in danger from love. It was in danger from their own fear of it. In losing you, they are finally faced with the truth they spent their entire life avoiding, that the cost of running from love is far greater than the pain of losing it. When the avoidant finally realizes they can't get you back, it's not just a breakup, it's an awakening. Every wall they built, every silence they hid behind, every moment they mistook distance for safety begins to turn against them. They are left standing in the ruins of their own defenses, realizing too late that love was never the threat. It was the healing they never allowed themselves to receive. The power they once held in withdrawal is gone, replaced by an ache they can't escape. They understand now that detachment didn't protect them from pain, it only postponed it. What they feel in the end isn't just regret, it's recognition. Recognition of what love truly was and what fear made them lose. And though they may never say it aloud, deep down they know the moment they lost you was the moment they lost the only version of themselves that was ever capable of being truly loved.